In 2005, around 150 world leaders gathered at the United Nations in order to define terrorism. After 2 days, the summit ended without reaching a consensus about the definition of the word terrorism. They issued a declaration stating that there was no reason for defining terrorism since everyone already knew what terrorism was. Of course, this is not the truth. The truth is that if they had defined terrorism properly, half of them at least should have gone off to jail. Terrorism has been perpetrated by many people, organizations, and states as well. What is really serious about this issue is that although nowadays terrorism is considered the most heinous crime of all, and although it is the crime that people are being warned about constantly, most governments have no proper definition for terrorism. However, international law experts and political science professors do have a very clear definition of terrorism. They define it as not only the killing of civilians, but the mere targeting of civilians. So if someone targets civilians but fails to kill them, that is still considered an act of terrorism. But again, the phrase targeting of civilians is not entirely correct, because civilians may be a legitimate target if they are militia, that is, armed civilians. This may make them a legitimate target in some cases. So a better definition is targeting of non-armed people or people who are not engaged in fighting. Well, what if someone kills his wife? Is this considered terrorism? Well, of course not, because there is no political agenda here. So accordingly, the proper definition is the targeting of unarmed civilians in order to promote a political agenda. Terrorism has been committed by individuals, by groups, and by governments as well. The individuals who committed terrorist attacks are not only Muslims. We have a striking example of an individual terrorist, a Jewish man called Baruch Goldstein, who in the 80s killed 39 Muslims as they were prostrating in prayers at the Ibrahimi Mosque in Palestine. This is clearly terrorism. There is also a famous Christian called Timothy McVeigh, who was responsible for the Oklahoma bombings, which left 1,000 people dead and injured. This is a Christian. There are also Muslims who took part in many terrorist attacks that we all know about. So terrorism has been practiced by Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and has been practiced by groups and organizations as well. One of the most famous of these is the Tamil Tigers, which is a Hindu guerrilla organization in Sri Lanka. This organization has actually carried out more bombings, including suicide bombings, than any other organization in the world. However, the worst type of terrorism is terrorism performed by countries or governments. Why is that so? It is because governments are expected to have more responsibility than individuals. In other words, what cannot be accepted from individuals definitely cannot be accepted from governments. When we witness the systematic killing of Palestinians and the bombing of Gaza and other Palestinian cities that have been going on for tens of years, we have to say that it is terrorism. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is another blatant example. Here, 2 Japanese cities were bombed with nuclear bombs. Unarmed civilians were intentionally targeted, and the purpose was to pressure the Japanese government to surrender during the World War II. This is clearly terrorism because there was a political agenda involved. What about the bombing of German cities and the bombing of London during the World War II? In all these cases, governments were targeting unarmed civilians in order to promote a certain political agenda. Unfortunately, these governments are not very smart because bombing of civilians never accomplished anything. For example, when German cities were bombed during World War II, the purpose was to make the German people rise against Hitler. However, the result was that the Germans rallied even more around Hitler and gave him justification for the criminal and racist actions he was perpetrating, all because of the attacks they had been subjected to. It is very important here to clarify the misconceptions that are prevalent among youth and which are used to advocate terrorist actions. For example, I remember when I was in a European country talking about the issue of terrorism, and I said that Islam does not approve of actions like the events of 9/11 or events of 7/7 in London or those of the 11th of March in Madrid. It does not approve of any of this. This was going on in front of a huge audience of non-Muslims as well as some Muslims. Unfortunately, 6 or 7 Muslims among them met my words with an uproar. They stood up, yelled, and threw chairs at me and even spat at me, making an altogether horrid scene. The security personnel came to escort them out, but I intervened and said that if they were taken out at this point, it might look to some people that I am the one misrepresenting Islam and that these people represented true Islam. I said that since they had voiced their opinions so vehemently, they must follow them with an explanation for all. So I asked them, please come and tell me what I am saying that is so wrong. Do you want to say that Islam approves of all the incidents I was talking about? One of them said, yes, you are an apostate. So I asked him, why? He said, because you obviously do not read the Qur'an. So I told him, well, please tell me where in the Qur'an you find proof that Islam condones such actions. He answered, we have a rule mentioned in the Qur'an that says, and if you punish, then let your punishment be proportionate to the wrong that has been done to you. That means that just like they did to you, you do to them. They killed our civilians and innocent people in Palestine, in Iraq, in Bosnia, and in Kashmir. And the Quranic verse says that I can do to them what they did to me. So I answered, okay, but do you know that non-Muslims not only killed our innocent people, they also raped our women in Bosnia and Herzegovina? So do you believe that you are entitled to rape their women? You said the verse gives you the right to do to them what they did to you. He answered no. So I pressed on. Why not? You said the verse gives you the right to retaliate in kind. So when cornered, he said, no, but rape entails fornication and that is a sin. So my obvious answer was, are you saying that fornication is a sin but killing innocent people is not? They are both sins. You must understand that the verse you quoted is talking about the magnitude of the retaliation and not the form of retaliation. In other words, it is equivalent to the verse that is in the Bible and that is also present in the Quran, which says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a nose for a nose, and an ear for an ear. So its true meaning is that one eye should suffice for one eye and not 2 eyes for an eye. 1 tooth for 1 tooth and not 32 teeth in retaliation for 1 tooth. In other words, you have the right to retaliate with the same magnitude. Do not exceed your limits. But even if your enemy rapes women, you should not do the same because you are a Muslim. If your enemy kills innocent people, you should not do the same because you are a Muslim. If your enemy has no principles that prevent him from committing such things, that is his affair. But you have principles that prevent you from committing such actions. You have the Quran. You have your religion. So what I want to make clear here is that the Quran criticizes Muslims when they imitate certain actions done by non-Muslims. It says, you are then like them. But we should never resort to that because we have our religious ethical principles that forbid us from doing such things. Next, we come to another misconception, which is that the Quran openly promotes terrorism as evidenced by the verse that says, make ready for them all that you can of armed forces and the tethered horses, that you may thereby terrorize the enemy of Allah and your enemy. So some people say, see, here it is loud and clear. It says that you may terrorize. So terrorism is written in the Quran as a command. But here we must stop and examine this more closely. To start with, there are 2 kinds of terrorism or terrorization, one of which is praised and one of which is condemned. The kind of terrorization which is praised and approved of is the kind that, for example, a policeman would use if he saw a thief running away with a sack full of jewels he had just stolen. Would it make sense for the policeman to say, wait a moment please, fear God man, I will give you 10 minutes to go back and return those jewels so you don't go to hell? Or would it make more sense for the policeman to take out his gun and say, stop, freeze, and put your hands in the air? If you don't stop, I will shoot. This is a form of terrorization, to instill terror in someone, but it is acceptable. Another point is that the verse we just mentioned is intended as a deterrent. If God were commanding me to terrorize a specific people, he should have indicated who they were. But the verse actually says to terrorize the enemy of Allah and your enemy and others besides them that you know not, but Allah knows them. So what does that mean? How can I terrorize certain people if I do not know who they are? The verse really means that when you have a powerful army, you will deter your enemy and the enemies of God and others that you may not know but are planning to attack you. All of these will be deterred and will not attack you even if you are oblivious as to whom they are. I remember very well that in 2009 I went to give a lecture to a group of American officers from the United States National War College. At the end of the lecture, they gave me a medal as a gift. On one side it was written the words National War College, and on the other side is the college motto, which in Latin it says, Qui desiderat pacem preparet bellum. Translated, it means, anyone who wants peace must prepare for war. Meaning that you must prepare your armed forces and have a strong army so that you can live in peace and nobody can dare to attack you. Another misconception about Islam is that it orders the killing of people everywhere. In 2003, I was at the American University in Washington, D.C., and there was an evangelical clergyman who had come for a debate with me. He started the debate by saying, "It is disturbing to live in a country with people whose book tells them regarding us, kill them wherever you find them," basically suggesting that in order to be devout Muslims, we should be walking around with a machine gun in each hand in order to kill every non-Muslim that we come across. I took out all the money I have in my pocket, and it was around $100, and said, "I will give this to the one who will answer my question." How can you find words that are even more violent and worse than what he said from a toddler's book? If someone can explain how this is possible, I will give him this money. Of course, everyone was confused and said, "How?" I replied, "All you need to do is to use Dr. Pat's magic scissors. Dr. Pat sitting next to me here has a pair of magic scissors that he uses to cut out some words from the Qur'an and quote them out of context. He just quotes the few words, 'Kill them wherever you find them,' which are only a small part of a much longer verse, 4 lines long. If we just read a few words further along, we find that it says, 'Kill them wherever you find them and drive them out from where they drove you out.'" This verse was sent to people who had been driven out of their homes. These people's homes in Mecca were occupied by aggressors. I am not saying that this verse is no longer valid. On the contrary, till this day, anybody who's turned out of his home or whose land is occupied has the right to fight the occupiers. Then I continued by asking Dr. Pat, "Why didn't you continue the verse? You either did that intentionally or you did it unintentionally. You either did it on purpose in order to mislead the audience sitting in front of us, or else you did it unintentionally because you are ignorant of the remainder of the verse." I then left the microphone and looked at him in order to direct the attention of the audience towards him, waiting for his answer as to whether he was deceptive or ignorant. Pat never answered the question, and it was an embarrassment to himself as well as the members of the Christian club that had invited him to come all the way from Arkansas to participate in a debate. The debate lasted for only 15 minutes. This is the immoral cut and paste game that they always play against Muslims. Cut off words and present it out of context. Islam is being attacked very aggressively, and all of us Muslims have a duty to defend it. But before we do so, we must first understand Islam properly so that we do not end up harming it. Thank you very much.